welcome back to the conference, the Plone Conference 2021. And it is our fourth day of talks. And with me now is Will Gwynn, who is the Manager of Web Communications at the Purdue College of Engineering, a slightly well-known university institution in the US. And Annette Lewis, who is my colleague at 6 Feet Up. She's a rock star developer. And today they're going to be talking to us about a Zope to Plone migration for the Purdue College of Engineering. Take it away, Will and Annette.
Hello, and welcome to our talk today, From Zope to Plone, Thinking User First During Migration. We already had introductions, but I'm still going to do it again. So, once again, my name is Annette. I'm a senior Python developer at 6 Feet Up. I got it started with Plone in 2013, and I've been running since wildly with it ever since. So lots of fun. And then today I have a co-presenter with me.
Yep. Hello, my name is Will Gwynn. So I'm the manager of web communications for Purdue University's College of Engineering. My background is in UX UI design. So I'm definitely used to looking at the front end, but in the last few years, I've gotten more into project management. So I manage the college's team in a lot of our digital marketing and communications initiatives for the college. So I'm really pleased to be here with Annette today presenting on this topic. So getting right into it, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so jumping right in here, the Purdue College of Engineering has this massive migration project that really needed to be done really for the last several years. So one thing you find out about working in higher ed is that higher ed tends to move a little slower. People get really used to the things that they work in. They resist change actively. So it's always a pretty big undertaking. Anytime you have a big project like this one where you're migrating out of one content management system into a new one. So we have this current CMS. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Annette. We're in a current CMS called Zope, and Zope's built in Python. It's got a lot of really positive, good features that we use at the college. It's really our entire college infrastructure is built in Python using Zope as sort of the framework. So one of the big things we need to be able to do was maintain that Python framework. We really had so much of our web apps, a lot of our tools and things that our college uses on a day-to-day basis were all Python-based web apps. So that was one of the biggest things we had to focus on in moving to a new CMS. So we introduced Python to the college back in 2001. And because of the version of Python we were using, we were seeing a lot of security concerns come up. And that was one of the big drivers for change. One of the big motivations we had to get out of Zope and into Plone. And obviously there were a great deal of modernization issues. So there were a lot of things in Zope that, our current content editors, a lot of the folks that work in the college on websites and manage websites, they were having to utilize code, copy and paste code. These are people who are not web developers. They're not web designers. They have no background. We weren't about to try to teach them all of these different languages. So we really needed to provide a really easy way for them to be able to manage and maintain their websites. So that was another really big driver for change for us. Go ahead and go to the next slide there, Annette. So kind of looking at the numbers behind this entire project, and you look at the Purdue College of Engineering, it really is kind of a mini university in and of itself. It's massive. When you look at all of our sites, we only really had 15 content editors, which isn't a lot when you look at how many subsites we have, more than 40 public-facing subsites. So there's a lot of content sharing, a lot of double dipping here. There's individuals managing multiple sites. Those sites consist of over 30,000 pages. So it really is it's quite an undertaking when you're talking about migrating from one CMS to another one. Those 30,000 pages really consist of about 25 departments and units. In the college, there's a slew of other research labs and faculty websites out there as well. So it's a massive undertaking, and it's one that we really had to be very deliberate about from the very beginning. So go ahead and head to the next slide there, Annette. So we sat down at the table. We started to discuss, okay, what's the best solution? If we had to start all over again, what would we go with? And that's that's where a lot of time and effort and a lot of discussions were had. So we worked with our IT department. It's called ECN, Engineering Computer Network. They are sort of the masterminds behind sort of the infrastructure and what the different servers and the security and everything that goes into what we've been using in Zope for all these years. So we all agreed at the table we really need to look at modernizing our current CMS. So we agreed that staying in Python was really the best choice because so many of our web apps, like I mentioned earlier, are built in Python. We rely on it almost exclusively for so many of the inner workings of our college. A lot of faculty depend on it to serve up web apps for research. So we really need to stay in that environment. So we looked at Drupal, we looked at WordPress, we looked at some of the PHP-based solutions out there, and we just decided that that's going to become too much of an undertaking to try to change our environment like this. So that's when Plone entered the discussion, and that's where we really enlisted the assistance of 6 Feet Up to help us kind of work through some of those infrastructure issues. How do we actually get this thing up and running? What are some of the concerns? What are some of the challenges going to be? This all started way back in 2018. So, there was a lot of just preparation, a lot of discussion right from the get-go.
So now that we have a basic understanding of kind of where the project came from, the first question you always ask is, how do we move from requirements to actionable items? Especially in this case, with such a large entity, we wanted to minimize the effect on users. We wanted to improve the user's experiences where we could. And then that means I really have to ask me a question. Who are my users? Not just that, but who are the users of the client ultimately down the road? Because I'm trying to make products for Will and his team, but eventually it's going to be the content editors down the line that really need to work with this. So looking at that, we start by identifying the current challenges. And we kind of broke that up into some big, broad groups. Just like the user editing experience is something that we could hear clearly was a problem for them. And that with the users having to blindly paste code into templates to try and build their pages and using a code editor for formatting text. We knew Plone was a great fit for that, which is rich text editors. Also user management and user permissions, because right now they're managing users almost locally to areas. So if you had to find a user, you had to go find that user in that area. So a decentralized user list is difficult, but Plone has a great user permissions management story. And then just the infrastructure alone, that you're working with an aging system and you have excellent in-house expertise for what you have right now. And it's really important to us that you can maintain the stack and that you're familiar and you can take ownership with it if you need to.
So that introduced a lot of challenges during this whole process. So one of the things we really had to keep in mind, really midway through this migration effort in working with 6 Feet Up, we had the Purdue University Central Marketing Office initiated a rebrand, really a complete overhaul of our entire brand standards. So we had one front-end look that we were going with from really the beginning of 2016 that had to be changed just from stem to stern. So we began the process, halfway through this migration, trying to adapt the templates, the front end look of everything we were doing in Plone to match those brand standards. So there had to be a way to seamlessly blend all of the subsites that were using the old look, the old template, into the new look, which was what our parent site was utilizing. So all new colors, all new typefaces, really everything from top to bottom had to be overhauled. So that was one of the big challenges. It's just, how do you deal with a rebrand from the university midway through a migration when you've already established all of the looks of all your templates? Another challenge we faced was converting all of our content types from Zope over to some reciprocal or congruent content types in Plone. there were countless content types we were using in Zope over the years. I mean, like I said, we've been in Zope since 2001, and so how do we try to marry those up with what Plone's doing? And so there was a lot of discussion and planning around, okay, is this going to be a one-to-one transition? Is it going to be seamless? Is there going to be anything that gets that we have to kind of move on from? Is there legacy stuff that we can bring over with it? So, a lot of challenges around that, and then obviously just the user experience. So, one of the big drivers I mentioned earlier behind this migration effort was trying to give our content editors a modernized interface to work within, something that doesn't require them to have to know code or to use code. So, a lot of every step along the way, we were trying to think about the end user. What is it they're going to do? How are they going to utilize this tool? Is it visual enough for them to be able to know how to use it even without any instruction from us? So that's always a challenge. How do when you think through how someone without training is going to utilize your platform, is it going to work?
So from here, whenever I'm dealing with such a big project, especially since we've got many living pieces, it's an active production website, there's many stakeholders. The first thing I like to do is distill it down into a few broad categories. So I can look at my requirements and say, okay, this is the essence of the project. So with this scale of a project, I would think that comes down to accessibility, usability, flexibility, and security. And what these broad categories really are is just the purpose and essence of the project. So once I get down into technical requirements, I don't lose sight of that when building the system. And I'm really continuing with that user-first development style. And of course, best practices are always a given, but I kind of use these as my focal point when I'm starting to develop any solutions. Now, of course, the next thing about that is giving chances. Developers love to craft beautiful systems. We want cutting edge, modern technologies, solid architecture. We want the best of the best. Looking at this especially, the absolute best might not always be the right answer. And that's where collaboration becomes key. We always like to communicate. So like whenever we saw something, we said, well, here's an idea of some way we could do something. Let's explain it. Let's talk about this. And sometimes we get an idea and we're just like, maybe that's not the best. It's okay to say no, but we always would have an alternative solution ready and just kind of work to get through what's going to be the best solution for everybody involved. Never ignore best practices though. But that open communication, especially with Purdue and engineering, really helped us, I think, come up with even some better solutions than we'd always think. And I like to ask myself every time, like, is it a best practice? Is it a bad practice? Is it a dangerous practice? Always going to avoid the last ones, always aiming for the best. And sometimes we land a little bit in the middle there, but if the users are having a great experience and it makes them feel like they can take ownership, then I think we're doing a great job.
Yeah, I really want to underscore this because, like I mentioned, you're going to see kind of a recurring theme throughout this presentation about, collaboration, discussion, kind of sharing ideas, transferring ideas, and that was such a crucial aspect of this entire process was, really coming out of our silos as a college, especially our IT group and our communications group, and having someone at the table with us to be able to kind of demystify a lot of the things that we didn't know. In a lot of cases, we didn't know what we didn't know. So having 6 feet up there, having Annette around, having Chrissy, having everyone there to be able to say, okay, here's your best bet. This is what people are doing in today's industry. Here's the standard. This is what you need to look at. And so that's such a crucial aspect of this. I can't emphasize that enough.
And on to our actual development goals. Since we're going Zope to Plone, it could be really easy to think these are pretty similar. Zope is on the back end of Plone. We can just go from here to there and it'll be okay. But we really wanted to make sure that we were doing things in a Plone-like way for whatever we were transferring. And technology is always evolving. So the next thing is if there's something that's being done right now, and so how can we bring that to the best practices of now? And always, people aren't going to read. If you have a huge document, they're going to try and skim and get to the base of what they need to do quickly. And that could be even more overwhelming for someone who's not technical or code-based. So we tried to make it intuitive, especially because people have their biases. I like to say, if you pick up your toothbrush with your right hand every day, if it's on the left, you're going to reach for your right first. So when we were making the new systems, especially since they were existing systems that your users were familiar with, we were going to try and make it intuitive so that it makes sense. And then make sure that if anything did have to be changed to be vastly different, we tried to make sure it was definitely going to be an improvement. Like, let's not overturn everything and say, well, here's something you're stuck with. Let's try and make it better so that they think, this is a great experience. I like this. I like this new way of doing things. And to get to that stage, as a developer, I often have to think in many roles, not just me as a developer, or even as Will as like the facilitator on their end, but really the system administrators, the content editors, the site administrators, and the technical support staff who have to support that stack. We want to give them something that they can all use. So now into actually crafting some of the solutions and some of the things we put in place. And we did so many interesting things with this site. So it was tough. Like Will and I went back and forth and tried to figure out what are some cool things that we did. And even just in that conversation, some of the things I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever, which were just technical. It was amazing some of the simpler things that I take for granted that really benefited Will and his team.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, this process of looking at the solutions before we move forward with them, it felt almost like going car shopping. In a way, it was like, you get that excitement of going to a dealership and you see all the fancy new cars, you see all the features associated with them. Your eyes kind of glaze over because you're like, what do I go with? There's so many opportunities here. There's so many ways I could solve this problem. And so like looking at these solutions, like, Mosaic, Diazo, like there's all these things you can do that will solve your problem in infinite different ways. So yeah, you kind of get that excitement built up. That's when things start to get really interesting, is going through some of these solutions with 6 feet up.
So we picked just a couple. I thought the content migration was really neat. Of course, Diazo was key to helping to port an existing theme into Plone, especially because it was still changing. Mosaic, which I think was one of the real superstars for the editors, and being able to have that through the web WYSIWYG experience, and then the sandbox. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into each one of these, starting with content migration. And the challenge about this is we weren't moving everything at one shot. We needed to be able to pull pieces of this, but they were changing. I couldn't just pull one export and then say, just pick up a piece. So we needed to be able to move the subsites one by one as needed. So we ended up modifying some of the migration code so that we could target specific areas and folders of the site and just export that. Then we also had the pipelines to translate the content and the images and everything that they had existing into new Plone content types. And then I think one of the really cool things that we did is, we had it so that you could re-import content over existing content non-destructively. So if we had to redo all the images or something, we could just delete all the current images in the staging site and just re-import that content, which really did come in handy. And of course, we had to rebuild a couple structures by hand, but that's a given because that was the improvement in the modernization of what we were doing with this. And then theming, which was quite a challenge, and that was about retrofitting Plone into an existing theme. Thankfully, that's exactly what Diazo is meant for doing. So we were able to use Diazo and XSalt or XSLT to do a lot of transformations on content to make it really look like their current brand. But we also had to think, because they did change their brand halfway through with new assets, new colors, new everything. And thankfully, we didn't theme ourselves into a corner. What we do is we have one file that's like the brand prod truth file. And then we've got some other files for like migration fixes, just to mitigate things that need to look more like Plone. And then anything else that we had to add. So that keeps these separate. And that's so if engineering ever just had a whole new file, we could at least just drop that in and then still just do small adjustments for the Plone part. And that really helped us to implement the new features in Plone in a Plone-like way without getting stuck in a corner and saying, oh, we need to go change this file, and then having to figure out what differences did we make down the line.
Yeah, that's going to get more into that here in a little bit, but that's very true. We really truly have a living theme. The Central Purdue University Marketing Office is constantly introducing uh, little changes to the web templates that they're requiring all the other colleges to incorporate. So yeah, we're very much making little tweaks and changes along the way. So this Diazo solution really kind of makes that no sweat for us. It's not a problem to sort of change everything globally at once. There's really no headache involved.
We also had to answer a great question, which is how do you let 40 plus subsites own their content while staying within visual brand guidelines, but make little tweaks here and there? And Purdue had an interesting solution in place, which was their local.css. So each little subsite could have its own local.css file, so they could change some minor things like little fixing some spaces. That is not a Plone thing at all to begin with. And that was one of the, do you really need this? Can we change this? Can we morph this? But in talking with Purdue, we found out this was really important for engineering to have that. So we ended up coming up with a really interesting solution. Chrissy gets this wherever you are. Thanks, Chrissy. But we recreated that feature through the web in the ZMI. So we added a custom browser view called local.css, which is great because since it's got a .css ending and it's got the right line type, browsers interpret it as CSS and will catch it. And then we have an action in the menu for each page where you can edit this local CSS, and it can even inherit CSS from the parents. So what that ends up looking like is this page right here. So we have this local CSS. You can view the inherited CSS. You can type in your new code, and then that makes it really easy for the users locally to make a couple of mild changes if they need to, without having to go through an entire release process or trying to specifically get just one section of the site, since this is all in one big site.
Yeah, this a lot of the big driver behind this local CSS solution. This is kind of what you get into working in higher ed. You have a lot of different department heads. They have a lot of different people in charge of subsites, and so try to keep them all within brand. You have to meet that basic requirement, but then beyond that, there's a lot of little tweaks that not all department heads agree should be the way their site looks. So you need to have that sort of granular control over little aspects of a site. Like maybe sometimes this department head wants a different shade of gold for that heading, so you have that ability using the local CSS to be able to make that tweak on a site-to-site basis. So that's been a big help.
And another thing that we ended up adding is we have all these subsites, and they needed to be able to do some type of control of some of the things, particularly the navigation. As we started going through, there were different types of navigation menus, so we needed a way for them to switch. And then site header text and just minor things. So our solution was a sub-site settings control panel. And since these are all lineage sites, we were able to use lineage.registry, which gives you a local Plone app registry for each site. And then we could have customized the subsites through that with a little panel that we made. So here's an example of the panel, and you can see we have the manage subsite properties. That's right at the base of the site, and it's only at the very base of the site, so you don't get to it by accident. And then once you go into this, you could set things like the navigation menu. So the first example I have up top is the engineering typical menu, what they would have across sites with that option. But they could also use a dynamically generated menu. So this is just like Plone's typical menu. And on top of that, because sometimes you need that extra layer of customization, we have the manually manage the structure. So someone who's really knows exactly what they want could actually put in their HTML directly for their menu, and that would populate up in the menu bar. And we're using Diazo to make those switches along with that registry value. Another thing we can actually do is set the parent text for the banner. So if you needed to set extra text here,